Hello and welcome to yet another edition of the Daily Report. It's Thursday, March 17th here in Korea, where authorities have announced well over 500,000 new COVID-19 infections over the past 24 hours. I've Kwon So standing by with the latest tallies. So just start us off.
Sunny, today's caseload is definitely higher than what we earlier expected. Over 621,000 infections were tallied as of 12 a.m. This Thursday in the span of 24 hours. And that's 621,266 domestic transmissions alone, with 62 cases from abroad. Now, this unprecedented figure has raised Korea's total caseload to above 8.2 million and also reporting an all-time high in the number of people who have lost their lives in just a day here at 429. And moving over to the number of people that are in severe or critical condition, this is also continuing to be at above 1,000, as you can see here. And going over now to our vaccination figures, a little over 2,200 and a little over 2,400 people have been administered with their first or second COVID-19 vaccine dose on the day before. And around 31,400 have been administered with a third shot or a booster shot, raising that total to 32.2 million. And if we take a look at the recent development in the cases in the past week, compared to yesterday, we see we just made this jump from the 400,000s to the 600,000s, skipping the 500,000 mark. And also comparing this figure to exactly a week ago, it is an on-week surge by 1.9 times. And also, there have been record highs across the nation in almost all places. We've got the capital's Seoul here for the first time with a 6-digit figure of daily infections, and also Gyeonggi-do province here, more than 181,900 cases reported in just a day, also followed by places like Gyeongsang-Namdo province and Busan that reported more than 40,000 infections. And also globally, infections have been on the rise. We're seeing close to 2.4 million new COVID-19 infections in the past day as of noon Korea time, also with an increase in fatalities, with more than 7,500 people having lost their lives. Now, going over to these 20 countries here, South Korea has now become the 12th country to surpass the 8 million mark. And India now has hit 43 million cases in total, although daily infections are in the 4 digits there. Meanwhile, Japan has surpassed Poland's total caseload in the past day. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for those tallies. Now, the unsettling spike in our daily COVID-19 numbers on this Thursday comes ahead of the government's planned announcement regarding the direction of our future pandemic guidelines. For more, I have Han Sung-woo here in the studio. Sung-woo, welcome back.
Happy to be here.
Right, so do you suppose today's alarming tallies, Sung-woo, will affect the details of the government's announcement tomorrow?
That's a good question, Sunny, and I think it's safe to say they will. I mean, let's think about it here. Over 1% of the entire population infected in a single day. That has to catch the attention of authorities, right? Even if they're pushing for a swift return to normal. That isn't to say, however, that the current social distancing guidelines in place won't be eased. In fact, SBS reported last night that it's already been decided behind closed doors that the cap on private gatherings will be raised from the current 6 to, starting Monday, 8 people max for 3 weeks. But whether business hours for restaurants and cafes will be extended from 11 p.m. to midnight reportedly remains to be discussed. As expected, the business community and medical community have different ideas on how to move forward, with many infectious disease experts calling for a halt to the easing of restrictions until the current Omicron peak, which has surpassed government predictions, passes sometime late next week. Some are actually accusing the government of neglecting public health in the pursuit of economic recovery. Business owners, on the other hand, are demanding, as they've been doing so for a long time now, the freedom to pursue their livelihoods without having to worry about debt piling up. It's apparent today's record-breaking surge will work in favor of the medical community. So, who knows? Despite reports being leaked on what will be announced Friday, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of the current distancing scheme being maintained for a few more weeks. What's most unlikely, however, is a complete lifting of antivirus curbs. something the public has probably been anticipating.
So, as you mentioned, that this week's daily numbers appear to have surpassed the government's earlier estimates. Do elaborate on that for us.
Well, yes, Sunny. Authorities had earlier projected that the ongoing Omicron surge would hit its peak between yesterday and the 22nd of March, reaching a daily average of as high as 372,000 before beginning to decline from next Wednesday.
Assuming the peak of the surge lasts as predicted and we respond accordingly with the current system in place, we believe this wave will be the last significant threat in the nation's fight against the virus.
But we saw well over 500,000 today, so at this pace, the actual numbers won't align with the trajectory health officials have drawn out. The number of patients in severe or critical condition, currently at just under 1,100, is moving along predictions, but partially because quite a lot of them are dying. An all-time high of 429 fatalities were reported today. The number of severely ill patients under intensive care is projected to shoot up to around 2,000 by the end of this month or by early April after the Omicron surge reaches its peak this week or the next. But this, in the end, is also a prediction, so authorities may have to do some recalculating.
Now, so Korea's escalating caseloads appear to have also caught the attention of the global health body, right?
That's correct, Sunny. The World Health Organization, I'm sorry to say that over the 7-day period from March 7th to the 13th, no other country in the world logged more new infections than Korea last week, at 2.1 million. That's according to the WHO, which had Vietnam and Germany trailing behind Korea at second and third, both with around 1.5 million infections each. The three were the only nations in the world to record over 1 million during the period, with the Netherlands at fourth, seeing nearly 500,000, followed by France with a little over 400,000. Let me add for reference that there was an 8% increase in the number of worldwide cases compared to the week before, but a 17% drop in the number of fatalities. At the regional level, the Western Pacific, where Korea belongs to, Europe as well as Africa saw increases in new weekly cases of 29%, 2%, and 12% each. The Eastern Mediterranean, Southeast Asia, and the Americas each saw drops of around 20%. The highest numbers of new deaths, meanwhile, came from the United States with over 9,000, followed by Russia, Brazil, Indonesia, and China, ranging from around 2,000 to 4,500 lives lost.
Right, some grim numbers right there. All right, so as always, thank you very much. I'll see you on Friday.
Of course.
Right. The World Health Organization, meanwhile, has also claimed the current worldwide tallies may not be an accurate portrait of the global pandemic trend.
Right, Sunny. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus warned that the cases being reported right now are likely just the tip of the iceberg, citing increases around the world despite the drop in testing rates in some countries. That's definitely not the case here in Korea, where even rapid antigen test results are being now used to confirm cases since earlier this week.
So in essence, quite a number of Korea's counterparts may not be implementing a comprehensive screening process as Korea is then.
Right, that is what the WHO chief is probably referring to. But also, despite there are being testing rates going down, there are also increases in those countries as well, in some counterparts.
Right. And moving forward then, the WHO has also underscored the growing presence of the stealth Omicron. Tell us about that.
Exactly. While it may seem like some countries are already out of the woods, especially with some nations continuously easing their antivirus measures, for instance, in Europe, the WHO notes that the stealth Omicron, or BA2 subvariant, appears to be the most transmissible variant so far, which is leading to recent resurgences. Now, in Germany, Germany continues to post a record high caseloads, with its disease control agency on Wednesday confirming close to 262,600 infections and 269 fatalities, along with an all-time high COVID-19 incidence rate of 1,607 per 100,000 people over the past 7 days. Driven by the Omicron variant, the subvariant BA2 made up almost half of all cases last week, while now less than 1% are said to be Delta cases. The UK, France, Italy are also countries that face fresh rebounds triggered by the highly transmissible stealth Omicron, while COVID-19 restrictions like mandatory mask wearing are gradually, or in some countries, abruptly being lifted. Scientists in the US now are closely monitoring this trend as the spin-off of the original Omicron variant has been becoming more common there as well. According to the CDC, a little over 23% of COVID-19 cases between March 6th and 12th were found to be the BA2 subvariant, a rise from around 14% in the first week of March and 7% toward the end of February. And we know that we have been seeing that pattern of the peak of the Omicron wave, which had started in South Africa, and then we saw the decline. Then it went to countries like the UK and Europe, and then to the US. And that's also why the US is now monitoring the situation in Europe.
Right. And over in Kharkiv, in war-torn Ukraine, so I hear hospitals there are working to protect their patients from much more than disease, right?
Right, Sunny. And the situation looks especially dire for coronavirus patients in critical situation. According to doctors at Kharkiv's Regional Infectious Diseases Hospital. Now here, as you can see, medical facilities are not being spared from Russian attacks, and this is why here, this hospital we're seeing here has been making preparations to protect patients and staff by equipping a bomb shelter in the basement of the building once air raid sirens ring. Staff members say the situation is difficult and tense, and everyone has to be on alert.
Here we are preparing gas masks for staff and patients of our hospital in case of a chemical attack. Here they are, sorted out by size.
Employees and patients able to walk come down here. But you know, most of our patients are on oxygen supply all the time. They can't be cut off oxygen.
The dilemma is that the most severely ill people cannot be moved from their hospital rooms as they need constant oxygen supply. That meaning in case of attacks, they would be vulnerable to bombardments, but when they are brought down to the shelter, they would die, is what the director of the hospital said. As of Tuesday, more than 600 buildings in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, were said to have been destroyed, including schools, nurseries, and hospitals. And the World Health Organization also on Wednesday reiterated its denouncement on the attacks on healthcare in the Ukraine, with an official saying using these attacks as part of strategy and tactics of war is completely unacceptable. And there are also concerns not only regarding COVID-19 but also other outbreaks of diseases such as HIV, tuberculosis, polio, and measles, and that because many people are taking shelter at places like, for instance, subway stations, and these are unsanitary places, and this is why officials are worried about the rise in infectious diseases, especially like COVID-19.
Right, and the whole world community right now is worried. All right, so thank you very much for the coverage.
My pleasure.
In line with aggressive plans to tame the country's record inflation, the U.S. Federal Reserve has raised its benchmark interest rate by 25 basis points. Our Shin Yoon has more on the hike and its broader implications.
For the first time since 2018, the U.S. Federal Reserve raised interest rates by 1/4 percentage point. The policy-setting Federal Open Market Committee on Wednesday decided to increase the federal funds rate to a range of 0.25% to 0.5%. For consumers and businesses, this increase in short-term interest rates will mean higher rates for loans. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell explained that the measure is to restore price stability amid sky-high inflation that has been running at the highest levels in 4 decades. Powell expressed some optimism, forecasting that the hike in interest rates would be a stepping stone for stable growth.
Although the invasion of Ukraine and related events represent a downside risk to the outlook for economic activity, FOMC participants continue to foresee solid growth. As shown in our summary of economic projections, the median projection for real GDP growth stands at 2.8% this year, 2.2% next year, and 2% in 2024.
But the GDP growth projected for this year is lower than what had been forecast in December. Back then, Fed policymakers had expected the economy to grow by 4% at a time when the biggest economic threat was thought to be the pandemic. But now, the Fed has detected new risks facing the global economy, mainly the invasion of Ukraine and spiking commodity prices. Finance experts in Korea also shared their thoughts on what the Fed's decision means for the Korean economy.
Raising interest rates in the U.S. may not directly affect us right now, but they can impact how South Korea changes its own rate policies. We need to consider hiking our interest rates because we're also seeing high inflation and weakening Korean won.
We expected the Fed to increase interest rates, so our financial markets were relatively prepared. But South Korea will most likely raise its own interest rates as well. This will then increase commercial lending rates, which could exacerbate our household debt burden.
The Fed has signaled the possibility of 6 more interest rate adjustments between now and the end of this year. This comes as they expect inflation to remain elevated at 4.1% until the end of 2022. 신예은, Arirang News.
Over in Eastern Europe, there appear to have been some tangible advances on efforts to end Russia's hostile campaign in Ukraine under a framework of 15 clauses. Our Victor Flood reports.
Russia and Ukraine have reportedly made significant progress on reaching a tentative peace deal. According to numerous media outlets, including the Financial Times and Sputnik, negotiators from the two countries have discussed the proposed deal in full for the first time. The 15-point draft includes a ceasefire and Russian withdrawal, with Kyiv having to accept neutrality and curbs on its armed forces. In addition, Ukraine has to give up its bid to join NATO. Despite projected optimism over efforts to end the war, Ukrainian officials accuse Russian forces of shelling a convoy of cars carrying fleeing civilians. They explained the city of Mariupol has been enduring a humanitarian catastrophe for days now, including an airstrike on a theatre where hundreds of displaced people were believed to have been sheltering. The UN says over 700 civilians have been killed since Russia launched its invasion on February 24th. Saying this includes over 50 children, the UN added the actual figures might be even higher. Against this backdrop, President Biden on Wednesday vowed additional US security assistance to Ukraine.
Now I'm once again using my presidential authority to activate an additional security assistance to continue to help Ukraine fend off Russia's assault. An additional $800 million in assistance.
Biden explained that the US will help Ukraine acquire additional long-range missile anti-aircraft systems at the request of Ukraine's president. He added Washington will also supply 9,000 anti-armor systems, drones, as well as 7,000 small arms, including machine guns, to help Ukraine's civilians defend their country. The International Court of Justice has also ordered that Moscow immediately halt its invasion, saying it's, quote, profoundly concerned by Russia's actions in Ukraine. While the court's rulings are binding, the ICJ has no direct means of enforcing them, and countries have ignored them in the past. President Putin has again reiterated that Russia's goal in Ukraine is to achieve a neutral status for the country. This, he says, refers to Ukraine's demilitarization and denazification. Victor Flood, Arirang News.
In neighboring Japan, a powerful earthquake rocked the country late Wednesday, setting off tsunami warnings and leaving over 2 million households without power. Yoon Jung-min has more.
A 7.3 magnitude earthquake struck Japan's northeast coast off Fukushima on Wednesday night, near the epicenter of the devastating earthquake and tsunami in 2011. The epicenter of Wednesday's earthquake was about 60 kilometers below the sea. The quake was felt as far away as Tokyo. Shortly after it hit, an advisory for tsunami waves of up to 1 meter was issued for parts of Japan's northeastern coast, including Fukushima and Miyagi prefectures. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said on Thursday morning that 4 people have been killed and 97 others injured. There have also been reports of power outages for more than 2 million homes. A high-speed train partly derailed, but reports suggest no passengers were injured. The earthquake struck a matter of days after Fukushima marked the 11th anniversary of the earthquake, tsunami, and subsequent nuclear disaster that devastated the region in March 2011. Japan's Nuclear Regulation Authority inspected nuclear power plants in Fukushima and other regions after Wednesday's earthquake and said it has detected no abnormalities so far. A fire alarm sounded in one of the reactors at the now defunct Fukushima Daiichi power plant, but reports say there was no fire. Japan's NHK said water pumps for spent fuel cooling pools at another power plant in Fukushima were temporarily down, but those returned to operation soon after. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Here on the local front is part of broader efforts aimed at reviving domestic consumption and propping up the travel retail industry. Korean passport holders can make unlimited purchases at duty-free shops starting tomorrow. That would be Friday. Our Min Soo-yeol explains.
South Korean travelers departing the country will no longer be subject to duty-free purchase limits. Currently, Korean nationals traveling abroad can spend up to $5,000 at duty-free stores, but starting tomorrow, this will be scrapped. This means outbound Korean travelers can make unlimited purchases at duty-free shops, just like foreigners. The Ministry of Economy and Finance said this is to boost consumer spending and help the beleaguered travel industry.
It will benefit travelers and help revitalize the duty-free industry.
Duty-free shops have suffered heavy losses due to travel restrictions amid the pandemic, and so the ministry hopes this revised rule will help duty-free operators. It's also expected to benefit Korean travelers as they can now buy high-priced luxury goods without limits, which could possibly drive up domestic consumption. But Korean travelers departing the country must still pay duty on goods valued at over $600 upon their return to the country. They must also pay duty on bottles of alcohol over 1 liter or worth more than $400, on perfume bottles larger than 60 milliliters, and on cartons of more than 200 cigarettes. It's the first time that the duty-free purchase cap has been lifted since its launch in 1979. Min Soo-yeol, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Iran's foreign minister on Wednesday confirmed that the UK had repaid a historic debt of $530 million, a massive sum that was said to have been received by Iran a few days ago. UK's debt to Iran goes back to when the UK failed to deliver its Chieftain tanks, which were ordered by the Shah of Iran before he was overthrown in 1979 following the Iranian Revolution. In 2009, the UK admitted that it owed Iran for the undelivered tanks, but claimed that the debt could not be honored while Iran was still subject to economic sanctions for its nuclear program. Following the news of the repaid debt, 2 British Iranians who have been held captive in Iran for years have been released. However, Iran's foreign minister denied any links to the subsequent release of the prisoners and the debt being repaid. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Wednesday met with UAE's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed as part of efforts to secure additional oil flows and increase pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin over Ukraine. According to Johnson's office, the British Prime Minister stressed the need to work together to stabilize the global energy market. Following the meeting, Johnson also met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, but failed to secure commitments from Saudi Arabia to step up oil production. Johnson said he had obtained an understanding from the Saudis that instability in world markets from a spike in energy prices caused by the Ukraine crisis was not in their interests. Another journalist has been shot dead in western Mexico, marking the 8th killed in 2022, raising fears about the safety of journalists in the country. Armando Linares, the director of Monitor Michoacan, was shot dead and came just 6 weeks after his colleague was killed. Before his death, Linares told other media outlets that armed groups who passed themselves as a criminal gang might be behind the killings. The Michoacan state has been marred by turf wars between powerful gangs battling for control of the drug market. The UN says it's received only $1.3 billion in pledges on Wednesday towards a $4.27 billion aid plan this year for war-torn Yemen. More than 17 million people in Yemen currently need food assistance, and the UN predicts that figure could rise to 19 million in the second half of the year. The lack of pledges comes despite an urgent appeal from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres for donors to contribute generously. The biggest contributor was the United States, who pledged $585 million. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Up next, we turn the spotlight onto our weekly focus on foreign media coverage of events here in this part of the world. For that, Kim Sang-yeon joins me now. Welcome back, Sang-yeon.
Great to see you, Sunny. So today we have international coverage on President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol, also analysis on North Korea's missile developments and its motives, and the Chorus FTA, and finally, Squid Game star Lee Jung-jae. So let's dive right in. The diplomat believes South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has a skeptical eye towards China and that Beijing must rethink its policy towards Seoul. The report says that Yoon's presidency will bring major changes to Korea's foreign policy and that China needs to make adjustments in its own strategy while making note of Yoon's tendencies. At the same time, the paper believes there will also be a degree of surprising malleability as Yoon is a career prosecutor and new to foreign policy. Therefore, it suggests that if China could make appropriate use of the opportunity, a win-win strategic and economic relationship can be developed between the two countries. And in the meantime, in regard to North Korea policy, NK News reported that Yoon plans to lead sanctions against the North, aligning with the West's interest in this region. It further elaborated that in order to do that, Seoul plans to deepen its ties with Quad members, namely the U.S., Australia, Japan, and India.
Speaking of North Korea, Sang-yeon, I understand the New York Times has touched upon the regime's potential motive for its increased missile activities. Tell us about that.
Yes, Sunny, the New York Times did write quite an in-depth analytical piece on that subject. And it believes the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un actually is just beginning with his missile developments. Now, the New York Times says Kim is vying for global attention as this is an important year for him for many reasons, and explained that 2022 marks his 10th year in power, the 80th anniversary of his father's birth, and the 110th anniversary of his grandfather's. The recent missile tests may be intended to boost morale at home amid a landmark year and to secure more leverage in future nuclear talks. However, the Times stressed that Kim Jong-un's nuclear ambitions are also about self-preservation amid a very difficult time for North Korea, which has been reeling under the effects of the pandemic as well as international sanctions. The article goes on to say that Kim seems to be using his weapons development as a showcase of technology to win the loyalty of the millennial generation, who are set to become his future base of power.
I see. On the economic front, Sang-yeon, I believe Arirang News covered this milestone as well. It's been a decade since the launch of Korea's free trade deal with the U.S., right?
Yes, Sunny, indeed. The foreign media also looked into the impact of the FTA as well, as South Korea and the U.S. 10 years ago this month ratified the Chorus Free Trade Agreement. The diplomat wrote an in-depth analysis on the Chorus FTA and said it's turned out to be the most economically and strategically significant trade deal negotiated by the U.S. with another country. The paper says that despite some initial concerns, most stakeholders in Korea and the U.S. have been satisfied with how the FTA has performed over the past 10 years. Bilateral trade in goods has grown by nearly 70% over the past 10 years since the FTA came into effect, with similar export growth also being enjoyed by both countries during this time period. The story concluded by forecasting that the future of their economic ties will continue to be shaped by the changes that have taken place since the FTA was first negotiated.
And finally, Song-Yang, you mentioned Squid Game's Lee Jung-jae. I understand he has added another award to his trophy cabinet.
Right. So Squid Game star Lee Jung-jae won the Best Actor Award at the Critics' Choice Awards 2022. This was held in Los Angeles, becoming the first Korean actor to be honored as such. The Times of India took note of Lee's stunning entrance to the red carpet event and said he won over the hearts of many people in the audience with his low-key acceptance speech. The drama Squid Game also won Best Foreign Language Series at the awards, and apart from Lee, Jung Ho-yeon and Park Hae-soo were also part of the ceremony, serving as presenters at the annual event. Another foreign media outlet, Pink Villa, reported that large crowds had welcomed the three actors outside the awards venue, along with Squid Game director Hwang Dong-hyuk, with very loud cheers. This trophy haul is just the latest in Squid Game's historic wins at the Golden Globes and the Screen Actors Guild Awards.
Right, it is. All right, so as always, thank you very much for the coverage.
Thank you for having me.
Among the many tasks facing the incoming Yoon Suk-yeol administration is that of building national unity, given what pundits claim was a polarizing presidential race. For more, I have Professor Song Se-ryun from Kyung-hee University. Welcome, Professor Song.
Good to be here. Thank you.
I also have Professor Cho Ik-young at Hongik University live on the line. Welcome back, Professor Cho.
Thank you.
Professor Song, the 20th presidential election was the most closely fought race in the country's history, with President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol defeating his rival Lee Jae-myung by less than a percentage point.
Right.
What are the implications of this reality?
Well, the election was decided by some 250,000 votes, but that's not the lowest vote differentials. That price goes to election happened in 1963 when the vote was decided by 150,000 votes. But as you said, in terms of percentage spread, it's the most tightly contested elections. But if you look at the content of it, there's nothing to boast about. There were this election was billed as a contest to pick the lesser evil. There were a lot of negativities. So probably there are a lot of points to improve about. But at the same time, 77% vote rate is not too shabby, and also a lot of issues came out. So everything is said and done. We have a new president with the opposition party still massive. They have 172 seats, which is close to supermajority. So I think if we can assume the infinite wisdom of the voters, the message seems to be that, well, you have the president and the opposition in a very formidable fashion, so get along. I think that the message is that this governing has to be made with a lot of cooperation and collaboration, which we have not seen much. So I think the story will be made with a new administration, and depends on what they do.
Right, we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Professor Jo, according to one recent survey, some 52% of Koreans believe President-elect Yoon will live up to public expectations with regard to state affairs. What are your prospects?
Before I address that, if I may add a couple of comments to what Professor Song has said, I find it remarkable that in this election there were actually more dead votes, so miscast ballots, than there were the number of votes that decided the actual outcome of the election. So there were some more than 30,000 ballots that were essentially miscast, and so they couldn't be counted towards the result. And the election was only decided by some 20 or so 20,000 votes. And so that's one thing that's remarkable. Second thing, 77% voter turnout is really nothing to be sneezed at. I know of countries where it's compulsory to vote. You have to pay a fine if you don't go and vote. And even there, you don't get more than 60%. So I think it really speaks to the level of our participatory democracy that we have this kind of voter turnout. Now, in terms of expectation of the president-elect, I really hope for the sake of our nation that he will be up for the task. But what I have seen so far doesn't really fill me with a lot of confidence because Mr. Yoon has had a very narrow range of life experience. He's been a state prosecutor for 27 years. Before that, he spent 9 years studying for the bar exam. All throughout the campaign process, he really has shown himself to be more of a strongman type of mold rather than the kind of modern president that our people, I think, are really looking for. And so I fear that there might be some misfit or a gap between what people expect from the president as opposed to the kind of leadership that Yoon is used to. I say this because he has really been in a hierarchical organization all his life, and he hasn't really had much experience or skill in terms of compromises, negotiation, those kind of situations where you really require a lot more openness, flexibility, humility, respect for the other. And so this is why I am a little bit concerned, but I do hope that he will be able to step up to the task.
Right. Professor Sung, this particular race was also one of the most divisive, with clear lines drawn across, that is, age, gender and geographic regions. What are your thoughts?
Well, as Professor Cho was saying, I agree with her in that this contest was not really exemplary. There's no K-politics yet. We cannot really say that Korea is exemplary in the politics area. However, I do think that in this negative, very less than exemplary situation, the election did turn out a lot of issues. And the young people get to see that their votes count. Democracy is noisy. I think that the fact that a lot of issues have been put on the table, regardless of any capabilities of the candidates that did not really instill confidence, I think that the institutions, political institutions in Korea is robust enough that if you manage well, the national dialogue will continue, and those issues that were put on the table will somehow see the resolution. I think a lot turns on what the incoming government does, and also the opposition government's willingness to talk and get to a constructive position.
Right, and keeping in mind what Professor Song has just said, Professor Cho, would you say the task of establishing national solidarity is of utmost importance then for the incoming administration?
Completely, and because the incoming administration is actually in no small part responsible for aggravating the division that was starting to grow within our society. Now, I put this down essentially to the fact that we are living in a very rapidly changing society, and what we used to hold as being certain is no longer certain. And this is especially true for the younger generation, people in their 20s and 30s, those who are just about to embark on their professional careers, truly become a full participating member of the society, whereas previously they might have been essentially students with no full sort of right to have their kind of say in what's going on. But statistics tell us that the people in their 20s and 30s, the so-called MZ generation here in Korea, are the first generation who are looking at having lower standard of living than their parents. Up until now, thanks to the rapid and expanding development in Korea, we've always had the hopes of having better future than yesterday, but it's no longer the case. So the younger people now don't necessarily have the expectation that they're going to earn more than their parents. They're going to live in better houses, have better cars, whatever, in terms of material wealth. And plus, they don't really have the positive prospect that the society can offer. All the changes in technology, society, culture, it's really sort of coming to converge. And what we know so far is no longer the case anymore. And so young people are filled with fear and uncertainty about their future. Now, in other countries, this kind of fear and uncertainty has very often translated to essentially hate towards outsiders, and that's mainly migrants and foreigners. Here in Korea, because those groups are mainly the competition for the younger people, but here in Korea, especially for young men, the competition is not really migrants or foreigners, because they are not really competing for the same kind of jobs, but actually women and older generation. And so I think this is one big cause of the gender and generational conflict that we are already beginning to see, starting in 21st century. But what the incoming administration, through their campaign, has done is to actually exacerbate and really polarize the different groups by trying to appeal to this particular group of young men in their 20s and 30s by crafting special policies for them and privileging them above any other group, to the extent that they were almost, practicing misogyny and discrimination against younger women. And so I think the incoming administration has a lot to answer for, the state of deepened divisiveness in our society right now. And they really need to get their act together and, do as much as they can to restore a semblance of unity.
Right, and before I go back to the gender conflict that you mentioned, Professor Jo, I'm going to ask Professor Song about this question before we go back to that. How do you respond to the incoming administration's calls for a special pardon by the incumbent administration for former President Lee Myung-bak?
Right, the presidential power, it's a political power, and it's controversial because it's a political power. Those in the opposition side will always criticize. I think that although it does not have the function of correcting any judicial decisions, I think if it's used well, you can have a national unity by resolving a lot of differences and past wrongdoings. So I don't have any qualms about the president having this awesome power. It's controversial in Korea, in the United States, other countries, but I think it has uses if used well for national unity. Now, the particular question of Lee Myung-bak, I think that on one hand, we recently had 2 past presidents in the prison, which in any viewpoints, it's not a pretty sight. I think that it has to be corrected, and besides, former President Lee Myung-bak is 80 years old. So in that sense, I would look at his age and say, well, be bygones, be bygones. So I personally would be for pardoning, but I think that people opposing the idea of absolving the former presidents, I think that they can put their efforts in some other contemporary and more fresh issues.
Do you suppose the pardon by the Liberal government at the moment would perhaps serve as a symbolic gesture, so to speak?
Yeah, that's the main point of national unity, because although there were very very passionate about looking at the past wrongs and making it right. I think the message has been sent, especially to the young people. Social justice was the main key issue in this election, although paradoxically and ironically, the president who really pitched at that point got hurt by it, by losing the election. But I think that the stage is set, that we can look at it in a more broader perspective.
Right. And Professor Cho, how should the Yoon administration approach its pledged restructuring of the government, including the possible dissolution of the Gender Equality Ministry?
I think slowly is the answer. Don't rush into things. Certainly, it was one of the key campaign pledges to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality, or actually how it is known in Korean as Ministry of Women and Family. And that was one of the pillars in their policy that was trying to appeal to the younger men. But I haven't really seen much detail about how they are going to divide the work that's actually currently done by the Ministry of Gender Equality to other divisions, because the work that they do is actually not just about women. It's about families, it's about teenagers, it's about children who don't have proper care within their family structure. So, how are they going to actually take up the work and, manage the resources? And one other thing that this ministry does is to actually look after the victims of digital sex crime. That's a really important issue that's actually growing in our society. And I really haven't seen any detailed plan about how they actually propose to do this. And even within the Conservative Party, there are loud voices that say the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family should be actually augmented. It should be given more budget to do their job properly. And so I don't think they really should prioritize abolishing of ministries. All president-elects promise to essentially, downsize the government and get rid of this division or that department, or even abolish ministries. But in the end, they come back to the mean and end up restoring them what they have abolished or gotten rid of in some form or another. And so I really would like to advise them to approach this matter with caution and some thought.
Right. Professor Song, some pundits believe that the transition period that we're looking ahead to may be quite bumpy. Do you agree?
Yes, by design, I think. Not by design, but the reality is that the incoming team, if they're not careful, or whatever they do would look like a victory dance, kind of despising the other. And the outgoing team might think that this is a last opportunity to use or exhaust their power to impede or put on their people on various posts. So we've seen in the past and historically, court packing is a famous example of putting their people in. However, seeing that this close campaign, close election, had a message of those two parties have to work together if they want to get anything done. I think there is more of an incentive for both parties to cooperate. Unfortunately, we have not seen that yet.
Right, and hopefully we'll see more of it in the near future. And now, Professor Cho, you touched upon the vitriolic division between men and women in their 20s and 30s that was very well exposed during this particular election. Having said that, and I understand this will be a tough question, but now that is the problem, what do you suggest to address that particular problem?
The solution is not going to be easy because it stems from the fact that the whole economy and society is changing, shifting paradigm. As I said earlier, I believe that a lot of it has to do with the structural change that we are experiencing, which is really filling young people with uncertainty and fear about their future. Particularly here in Korea, the societal expectation of young men is that they should still be the breadwinners. They should still be earning more than women do. They should be providing for their family. They should have jobs that they can be proud of. They should have steady income, secure positions, essentially be a success. And given that we have some 80% of our young people who have with college degrees, their expectation of the kind of job that they should get, given all their effort in studying and working hard, is much higher than what the economy can offer them, because the kind of middle class white collar jobs that these people are after are disappearing, and they're being replaced with something, but we don't really know what they are yet. So this is why I think this uncertainty and fear is essentially alienating them from other groups, and they are seeing the others as their competition. And what the political groups have done is to really exploit that and deepen the divide. And so what we need to do is essentially ease that pressure on young people and to let them know that, one job is not going to decide their entire future. Strengthen our social safety net, strengthen our welfare system, and give them the chance to fail and then get up on their feet again. We are so harsh towards failure in our society, and it is as if unless you get a great job immediately after you graduate from university, your life is over. Essentially let them know that that's not the case. Give them more opportunity. And that's not something that's easy to do. And so this is why I think government policies are so important at this point, because we need to point the country in the right direction so that we can actually move with the technological change and open up new possibilities, new frontiers, and new opportunities. But I'm not really seeing that happening among the politicians right now.
Right, unfortunately. And keeping in mind what Professor Cho has just said, Professor Song, how can those within the political arena then seek to address this animosity between the two genders, very briefly speaking?
Well, the gender animosity is not new, but I'm afraid to say that our tradition or religion or whatever has not equipped ourselves with the directions as to what the future holds. I think that this issue needs to be solved by dialogues and looking for new ways. And the encouraging sign is that young people are involved, which they are facing the issues on a daily basis. So it's uncharted territory, and if this election served anything, as I said, they put this one on the table, and it's not going to be quiet, it's not going to be peaceful, pretty noisy, but we have to expect that with the right attitude of trying to get to certain resolutions, I think they're earnest in dialoguing and getting to the result. I think that's something that we have to be prepared for, rather than saying that this is the right answer, we gotta get to there.
Right, so coming to the dialogue table with the right attitude would be very important then. Professor Song, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Cho, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, the new administration is poised to take the reins of the country on the 10th of May, well after Korea's Omicron wave has hit its peak as predicted by authorities here. Stay safe. Thank you for watching.
The highly contagious Omicron variant is spreading rampantly.